Good evening, everyone. I'd ask that you would please rise as Pastor Tim Moulter leads us in an invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let us pray. God, we thank you for the opportunity to gather together. I thank you for each and every person represented in this room, both on the council and those who are public citizens. We thank you for our community. We ask that you would continue to guide our leaders, give them wisdom, direct their steps, Lord. We also lift up the block parties tomorrow, the National Night Out, that it would just be a great time for neighbors to get to know each other, to build friendships and relationships. We pray that we would have a strong community, that we'd continue to partner with our local law enforcement. Thank you for the men and women that keep our community safe. We just pray a special blessing upon them and first responders. And so we just entrust this meeting to you, and we pray that you would be honored and glorified through the discussion and the agenda and the outcome. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. It is Monday, August 5th, 2019, and I'll call this meeting of the Fergus Falls City Council to order. Roll call, please.
Here.
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 And we have a quorum. First item on the agenda this evening is the approval of the agenda, and I'll call on our city administrator, Andrew Bremseth.
Yeah,
If there's any additions or corrections.
you bet. Thank you, Honor members. There are a number of things that I need to mention this evening. Under petitions and communications, we're going to add Annie Deckert from Greater Fergus Falls. On consent agenda, I've been asked by Councilmember Kwame to remove items 3 and 6. And then I would like to remove item number 4 and just make a clarifying statement in regards to that. And then under new business, number 1, tax levy update, that will be removed from the agenda. We'll be bringing that back at another time.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. With that, is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
I would just like to pull number 9 for just a real brief discussion.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve?
I need to add also number 1. I've got one comment to make on the minutes.
Okay. We got 1, 3, 4, 6, and 9.
All right, sorry. Got that one kind of late.
Is there a motion to approve that amended agenda? Thank you, Scott.
I'll second it.
Thanks, Brent. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries. There are no public hearings or bids to award this evening under petitions and communications. First item, we have a proclamation for National Night Out, and I'll read that. Whereas the National Association of Town Watch sponsors a national community building campaign on August 6, 2009, Tuesday, August 6, 2019, entitled National Night Out. And whereas the National Night Out campaign provides an opportunity for neighbors in Fergus Falls to join over 38 million neighbors across the country in approximately 16,000 communities from all 50 states, U.S. territories, and military bases worldwide. And whereas the National Night Out is an annual community building campaign that promotes police community partnerships and neighborhood camaraderie to make our neighborhoods safer, more caring places to live. Whereas neighbors in Fergus Falls assist local law enforcement members throughout the joint community building efforts and support National Night Out in 2019. And whereas the volunteers community-wide are hosting block parties of more than 29 in more than 29 neighborhoods to build safer, more caring community. And whereas the community members are called upon to attend the block party in their neighborhood and to support of National Night Out on Tuesday, August 6, 2019. Now therefore further let it be resolved that I, Mayor Ben Shire, do hereby proclaim Tuesday, August 6, 2019 as National Night Out in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. Thank you. Item number 2, we'll call on Greater Fergus Falls CEO Annie Deckert to give us an update on a project, a community portraits project that she's working on.
Don't get too excited. Thank you, Mayor, Councilmember, staff. Annie Deckert, just wanted to let you know, you might have seen on social media, but as part of our mission of developing businesses, attracting new ones, trying to attract and retain the workforce, we are doing a very aggressive promotional and marketing outreach campaign. And on August 29th, which is the Arts on Lincoln event, we are having a professional photographer come in and spend about 10 hours here taking a ton of photography from drone images to businesses to the downtown to manufacturers. And so we are looking for community members and families who want to be a part of that photo shoot. We'll be using all of those images for social media, website, print, maybe billboards and that type of thing. So we've gotten a couple people interested now. If you upload a photo on social media and hashtag greater FFMN, we are accepting people until Friday the 9th, and then we will contact those next week. So I know some of you have already submitted, so thank you very much, but I just want to let everyone know and I encourage you to participate.
Thank you, Annie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Under the consent agenda, so we have item 2, 5, 7, and 8 remaining. So if any of those would like to be discussed, if not, we could accomplish those through one resolution if someone would like to offer that.
I'll offer that, John.
Thank you, Jim.
I'll second it.
Thanks, Anthony. Roll call, please.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
That resolution is approved. All right, item number 1 would be a motion approving the July 15th and July 31st minutes from the City Council and Committee of the Whole. Scott, did you have a question on the minutes?
On page 2 of the minutes, regarding the Amy Court name change and Ed Newman's request to change the name from Amy Court to Anna Court, the sentence reads, Kwame felt the city should comply with the request as he owns all abutting property and it would show the city's willingness to work with builders. I'd like to suggest we change that sentence so that it doesn't sound like I own all the property. And
Sure.
the proposed sentence would read, Kwame felt the council should approve the request as Mr. Newman owns all the lots on the street in question, and this approval would demonstrate the city's willingness to work with developers.
Fair enough. Is that a motion to
I'd like to make that motion, and I gave a copy of this to Lynn.
Sounds good. We got that motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Krista. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Scott. All right, item number 3 is a motion directing the city attorney to draft an amended rental registration ordinance. Scott, was that you as well?
Yeah, I made the request. I don't know that I'm alone in it, but maybe I am. Further down in our agenda, we're going to be talking about the first reading for this proposal, and it seems to me that directing the attorney to draft a amended ordinance at this stage of our meeting is a little ahead of the game. I think we need to work through some of the details, and then if we've got some information to pass on to the attorney, then they can take it and go. But I just don't see how we can go forward with this particular motion at this time.
Sure.
So it would be, I would like to make the motion to remove that or to cancel that at this point.
So that would just be a non-motion.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
Your Honor, I would agree with Councilmember Kwame. I think I've had a number of conversations, and I think we need further discussion before we waste kind of the attorney's time in drafting an ordinance.
Sure. Sounds good. And I have some comments on that too. So we'll just, unless there's someone who wants to make the motion, with that one, we can have the discussion further on. And then if at a certain time we're ready to bring forward a motion to have the city attorney draft whatever amended resolution or ordinance there is, then we can do it at that time. Is that fair enough?
Yep.
All right. Item number 4, resolution authorizing the Aquatics Committee to seek a proposal from U.S. Aquatics to review and revise the project scope, location, cost estimate, and staffing based on updated. And I believe, Andrew, you just had a qualifying statement?
Yeah, I just want to clarify, in the presentation materials and in the minutes, it indicates that SHPO has basically said that the site would not be approved. And I did have a conversation with SHPO earlier today, and that is a misunderstanding, and they have in fact not taken an official position on that piece, but it still is the desire of the Aquatics Committee to proceed with this action and continue to explore locations and other things listed in the resolution. So just wanted to clarify that SHPO has not taken an official position on that or responded to anything that's been submitted, because we have not in fact submitted anything to them. And they just wanted to have that clarification on the record.
Your Honor, I'd like to add something as well, if I can. And when the Aquatics Committee go out for this quotation, I would like to ask that they get the proposal to include some comparative data, if possible, from adjoining cities. Obviously, we know Breckenridge and Wahpeton have similar pools. And one of the questions asked to me is, what is the city going to subsidize this to? So I think if they're going to go out there and do a study and a survey, then we should include upfront, ask them to do that comparison, get that comparative data, so it's out there.
Yeah, Your Honor, remember, that has been done, and we can share that with the council and the public as well. But I know that those conversations have been done by Steve Plaza.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Anthony. With that, is there someone like to offer that resolution?
I'll offer that, Your Honor.
Thank you, Justin.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Caroline. Any further comments or questions? Roll call, please.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
That resolution is approved. Item number 6 is a resolution approving Sourcewell's proposal to provide city planning services and zoning services for the city of Fergus Falls. Scott, I believe you pulled it, and I think you just were looking for Andrew to provide some information to the public on what this would entail.
I think it would be helpful if the public heard the story on this a little bit. So if you wanted to fill us in, Andrew, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
you bet. Thank you, Your Honor, Councilmember Kwame, council members. I gave a lot of details last Wednesday at the Committee of the Whole meeting, so hopefully those in the public had an opportunity to view that. But essentially what we did in looking for a replacement for our city planner, we explored several options, one being hiring a full-time employee, and others being talking to firms, in this case Sourcewell, which is a service cooperative located in Staples, Minnesota, that services other communities and provides planning and zoning services to them. And in conversations we had with them, we understood that there was a good opportunity to carve out a position or a full-time person that could be split between the city of Fergus Falls and the city of Little Falls, two fairly similar, other than in size, communities that have a lot of similarities in regards to zoning and planning services. And by going in this direction and utilizing a contracted service rather than having a full-time employee on staff, we're projecting that we'll save about $55,000 next year. There is one drawback to going in this direction, and that is that we'll have less, office hours for the public to interact with these folks at any given time, but we'll certainly still provide adequate office hours and the ability for somebody to be reached at any time during the business day, as well as existing on-site staff that could do some of the minor permits and real simple issues as well. So I really think this is a good way for us to go. Not only do we realize a significant cost savings, but we have a very professional organization and a very professional person that would be providing these services rather than hiring a full-time staff person to service 40 hours when I think the need is less than that. So I think this is a win-win. Not only do we save tax dollars, but we provide high level of service and can really get creative with what this looks like for the community and make it work for the community. So I am very happy about this and recommend that we move forward with it.
Thank you. Andrew, is there any questions? If not, I would entertain a resolution.
that.
Thank you, Jim.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Scott. Roll call, please.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
That resolution is approved. And the last item is item number 9, which is a resolution approving the donation of 2 bicycle fix-it stations from Fergus Brewing Company, West Central Initiative, and Petal, Fergus Falls. Andrew, was that?
Tom.
Oh, Tom.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just wanted to just take an extra moment to recognize Falls Brewing Company, Petal, Fergus Falls, and West Central Initiative. They're donating 2 bike repair stands, and having used a few of the bike repair stands around town, I sure appreciate them being available, and I appreciate the organizations that are helping to make them available. So just wanted to make sure that they got recognition where it's due, and with that, I will offer the resolution.
Thank you. Tom, is there a second?
I'll second that, Your Honor.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, Tom. Roll call, please.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
That resolution is approved. Under ordinance and resolutions, we don't have a ordinance for the first reading, but I do think we can have the discussion in its place to see what direction the council wants to go with that. Just to give a brief background, we held a public information hearing, not a hearing, but a public information listening session last Monday, and we heard from a number of landlords, rental property owners. And I've also had an opportunity to speak with a number of council members and staff. And I guess the question that I would pose is, back in February, the city council decided this was a direction that the council wanted to go. Staff has proposed an ordinance to that effect. But after hearing some of the remarks and talking with some of the council members, I'm wondering if there's not a way to meet those objectives, but do so in a way that takes into consideration some of the things we heard last week, and do so in a way that maybe is more phased in. And so I guess I'll just kick off the conversation in that way. And I would ask Andrew, do you want to just maybe talk about some of the things that internally you've heard from other council members, and as staff you've maybe thought, and then that can start the conversation amongst the council.
Sure, yes. Thank you, Your Honor, members. We've spent a lot of time on this internally over the last week, talking about some of the questions that were posed last week, and I think they were very good questions and good feedback, and very appreciative of that. And we sat down and tried to identify what a potential fee could be and some of the other questions that were posed to us. And as we were working through that, we were having more questions than answers, quite frankly. And we had identified a lot of what I would consider as policy level questions that the city council really should and probably will weigh in on. And while we were having those discussions internally, we were brainstorming ideas as to how we could roll this out, taking into consideration the feedback and the comments that we heard last week, the comments of the city council previously in regards to wanting to move towards having all rental units in the community inspected. And I don't have a proposal for you this evening, but I do think that there's an opportunity to find a way to compromise and phase in this program so we ultimately achieve our goal of having all of our rental units within a rental inspection program, but doing so in a way that minimizes the impacts that we talked about, or that we heard about last Monday night. So I guess what I would say to the city council, what I would offer up, is that staff continue to work on some of these things. I know that we're not going to take action this evening because we did not take the action to direct the city attorney to do the ordinance. But I do think that if we get some feedback from the city council, we can finalize a potential compromise proposal that we could bring forward to the city council that I think would probably achieve the goals of this group, but also be more palatable based on the feedback that we received last week. And I think that's a win-win for everybody if you're asking me. So I guess I'll leave it at that unless there's specific questions. There are policy level questions that I think need to be answered, and the big one for me, I guess, is what's the city council's desire to subsidize or have this program be self-sufficient, and I think we need to talk about that, but I think we can do that in relation to a bigger conversation around this ordinance. So I guess I would ask you, Mayor and Council, how you want to proceed from here, but if we get some direction and we have some time, I think we can bring back a compromise that would be good for everybody. We've started to talk about what that could look like internally.
What are the wishes of the council? Anyone? Anthony?
I can go first. I've spoken to a number of landlords, and obviously and Andrew at the same time. But I think that to a certain extent, I think we do have some landlords that are in good standing in the community, and to a certain extent, it appears that we're kind of punishing them with kind of more regulation, versus kind of ones that obviously are more challenging for the community. And I think as much as we appreciate that, that's kind of happens a lot in life. The old 80-20 rule, you create, rules for kind of people that, we keep the honest people honest, and, the non-honest people are like that. But I think that, I would like to see us look at kind of how can we kind of define a good standing landlord and not subject them to the same rules as such. I mean, we can hold them to the same standard, and look at perhaps the complaints. If we're getting complaints from a certain landlord, then then we try to kind of obviously address those. I suggested that maybe we could have a minimum, where where we could have kind of an exception, for people that only own, say, a single digit number of units, where it's not their main kind of business. I mean, if it's kind of like we heard on Wednesday, there's, people that own 1 or 2 units and they live in one and they rent a couple, or they have another house and they have a more intimate relationship with their tenants. Is that something that we can work with? And I think, one of the other things is we have in the ordinance, the way it's proposed is that if it's a HRA inspection, we don't count that as a city inspection. HRA inspect annually. We're proposing, every 3rd year. If you have a HRA tenant and you're being inspected annually, it may not be to the same depth as the city would propose, but the fact that somebody's going in that unit once a year, at least it's somebody's going in it. And HRA, and Michael's here from HRA, so I'm sure he could attest to it. I mean, it's not, they're looking for the welfare of the tenant. So if there was, excessive mold or there was plumbing issues or electrical issues, then, HRA will address that with the landlord. So I think we could be sort of somewhat self-assured, that, if HRA is handing out a check, they're not just doing it, willy-nilly. There is some control in there. So I think, and that would, come back to Andrew's point about, do we want this to be self-sufficient? If HRE is doing it, then we don't need to double dip. But I do think, that we need a sort of a bigger conversation. How broken is the rule that we have and the ordinance we have? And, maybe it needs tweaking, but I don't know whether it needs to be rewritten. And I think we're rewriting it. So, as I say, I think our biggest challenge is that the people we hear from are the people that do a good job, and unfortunately we don't hear from the landlords that aren't doing a good job are not in the audience today. So that's my 10 cents.
Thanks, Anthony. Anyone else? Have Brent?
Yeah, I'm pretty much the person who pushed for this in the beginning, and because I've heard of a lot of complaints from a lot of people as far as landlords not fixing anything, people not getting their security deposits back for trivial little things. And it's one of the things where I want to basically make sure that when somebody's living in an apartment, that you're not fixing things and the landlord is just walking away from their responsibility. We've got too many properties in this town where literally you can walk by and say, yeah, that's a problem. The roof is bad, the windows are bad, and when you call the landlord to fix something, they don't fix it. And in some cases, I understand that there are good landowners out there who are opting out because they just don't want to inconvenience their tenants. But the problem we've got is there's a lot of bad landlords out there who just aren't fixing anything. And then I think that what we're looking at doing is not necessarily punishing the landowner, but basically we're giving them the tools they need in order to deal with problem tenants, and also the tenants to be able to deal with landlords who just won't fix anything. And that's kind of the reason why I'm still pushing in this direction, but I'm willing to look at other options in order to minimize on the responsible landowners who are basically taking care of their properties and who decided to opt out. Because from what I understand, opting out is considerably higher in price, and even though overall the price for the people who are in the preferred practice may go up a little bit, the people I don't think, and I can't get quoted on this until we get the figures, if you're in a opt-out situation, I don't think that the fees are going to end up being more than you are now. You're just going to end up with a little bit more of an inconvenience. And I do think a lot of tenants in the long run are going to be able to say, it's a little bit of an inconvenience for somebody to come into my apartment, but at least now I know the city's coming in and they're looking at things, and if things need to be fixed, they're going to get fixed. So that's just my take on the matter.
Thanks, Brent. Is the council open to giving staff an opportunity to work through some of these issues that they've heard and bring back something for us to discuss and debate that maybe tries to achieve some of the goals, but does it in a way that takes into consideration the concerns we heard last week, and maybe does so over a different time period and does not inconvenience those looks at the HRA and just some different options to minimize the impact? Yes, Jim?
Do we need to get together as a group work session to discuss some of this along with staff, or let
think-
staff put their stuff together and then have a mini work session or something before a council meeting to go through it?
I think that would be a good idea. I'm not sure if we
Yeah,
want to set that. How long would you anticipate that you need to bring?
I think in
Framework.
I think in 2 weeks, at the meeting on August 19th, we could have a recommendation from staff as to what could be considered a compromise, and I think we can do it during our regular meeting.
Okay.
I guess the question I would pose to the city council is it your goal or a majority of your goals to move in this direction and to require units to be inspected? Because if that's not the goal of the city council, I don't want to spend a lot of staff time working down that road. But
I think some of the things that personally, I'll just say that having talked with you and the chief about this today, some of the approaches that we're taking are reasonable and they go towards that goal, but they do so in a way that protects those who have long-standing rented properties in this community, and I think they're reasonable approaches that should be. And also remember that more than 60% of the units in Fergus Falls are currently being inspected by the choice of the property owner. So, I mean, I think it's worthwhile to take into consideration, what Brent said, what Anthony said, and at least have that discussion.
Okay.
But that was the direction in February, and I think we can do so in a reasonable way.
I think I would add, I don't know whether we can do it somewhat as a joint kind of thing with the other item that kind of April brought up on Wednesday was kind of, because I think, to some extent that ordinance, the two are kind of, go hand in hand. I mean, if we're going to look at, trailers, boats, and kind of, junk that's left in people's yards, I don't know whether it's too much in one session, but I mean, to some extent, the two go hand in hand. If we're going to put an ordinance in place where you got to tidy up your yard and make your house look reasonable, then that would answer some of the questions you've got of some derelict-looking buildings.
Let me just say quickly that ordinance is in place, and we have an expectation that people tidy up their yards and have them looking nice. I don't want to lead people to believe they have an option at this point in time.
But again, I think it's up to us to put the ordinance in place, and then staff enforces that ordinance. I don't think it's right for us to put an ordinance that puts staff in a position where they're actually enforcing the ordinance, that they're raising the ire of the public and coming back in here and upset. So I think it's a worthy discussion that April brought up, and I think you're right that they could be discussed simultaneously. Would it make sense to? Do we have a work session next? Do we have a work session next? Month, 2 weeks from now.
You got the Port Authority, so it'd be a month from now, or
I think, I mean, I agree with Anthony to a certain extent, but I would just urge you to take each one of these separately, because there are separate issues here, and I think from a staff perspective, we need to go back and kind of clean up ourselves internally, some of the issues. And so I would just, to keep things very easy to understand and straightforward, I would just address this rental issue, and then at some point down the road, we'll look at some of these other code issues. But I think it just lends itself to some confusion. And getting mixed.
All right, I appreciate that. So let's I'll give 1 second, Scott. You're up next. I would suggest we let staff talk about this internally, and give them the discretion of whether or not they think that this is something that warrants a separate work session, or if there's something that we can talk about in 2 weeks. Does that work for you, Scott? Did you have a comment?
A couple of comments, and I think that going to a work session and having further discussion on this is a positive, proper thing to do. But I'd like to point out a couple of things. First of all, in the comments that we've heard, I haven't heard anybody saying, I'm sure glad this ordinance is in place and I wish it was even stronger or anything to that effect. All the comments that I've heard have been essentially negative, saying, why are you doing this? I don't like it. I don't want it. Stay out of my place. Those are the kind of comments that I'm hearing. So going forward, as the staff is looking for input, the kinds of things that I'm hearing is, if you're going to do anything, do nothing. At least maintain the opt-out provision so that those who don't want to have to be bothered by this have a way to opt out of it in some way. It seems to me that that's been what we've been hearing. It kind of goes back to the very first question for me, is why this even exists in the first place. If this was something that the tenants came to the city saying, help us, we're needing help, or the landlords came and said, help us, our tenants are in trouble, or did
was a
we
public
just look out
safety.
across the
It was
ground and
public
say,
safety.
we need to do this? I don't know how it came to pass in the first place. It just seems to me like it's a really big hammer for a real small nail in a lot of ways. It just is kind of that way. With those comments, I guess I'll turn it then back to you and let you move it on to the city work session or however you want to take it. But those are the kinds of things I've been hearing about this.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. Any other questions, comments? If not, we'll let staff come back with some proposed recommendations. We can discuss it then and see if we want to move forward with an ordinance or if we don't. Fair enough?
Yep.
All right. Item number 2 is a second reading of ordinance 89, 7th series, the renaming of Amy Court to Anna Court. It's been to committee and have had a first reading. If there's any questions, if not, roll call, please.
Yes.
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 That resolution is approved. Item number 3 is a resolution encouraging staff to entertain redevelopment opportunities for building number 29, the Memorial Building on the RTC campus. Did you want to just address that real quick, Ann?
Yeah, I would. Thank you, Your Honor members. As I mentioned at our committee meeting on Wednesday, there's been a party that's expressed some level of interest in renewing their interest in the Memorial Building at the RTC campus. And about a year and a half ago, the council at that time had multiple parties inquiring, and they had talked about going through an RFP process. So I just wanted to get an official action of the council on record to state that we would go away from that previous action, which was to go through an RFP process, and allow us to begin talking directly with individual developers about this opportunity. So really just a formality, I guess, and our friends at Greater Fergus Falls will take the lead on trying to bring something back to us. But since the previous action was related to an RFP, and on Wednesday we talked about it and wanted to bypass the RFP and just start working with developers, I would like a resolution in place to that effect.
I'll offer that, Your Honor.
Thank you, Justin.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Brent.
I have a comment, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Anthony? Obviously, I had some discussion on this and kind of obviously offered it to put it on the consent agenda on Wednesday, but unknown to me, I have a conflict of interest in this matter, so I will be abstaining from the vote. But I would also actually encourage it to not just be the Memorial Building, but the RTC campus in total. So, thank you.
That's fair.
I mean, we shouldn't just limit it to one building.
Sure.
I can amend the resolution
Yeah,
to
let's
reflect
do that.
that.
Does that make it officially amended? Brent, is that okay?
Yes.
So it's amended to include the entire RTC campus. Good. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 Abstain.
Yes.
Yes.
That resolution is approved. Item I is presentation of claims. Tonight we have claims in the amount of $2,404,263.55. If there's any questions, we'll direct them to our city finance director. Jim?
I'll offer that.
Offer that resolution. Thank you, Jim.
I'll second.
Thank you, Krista. Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 That resolution is approved. There are no board, committee, or department reports this evening. There are no reports from staff or administrative officers. Under old and unfinished business, we'll have an update on the community task force, which, just to remind everyone, that was formed after our February council retreat, and looking at community priorities, where we listed off the different priorities and kind of narrowed them down. And one of the outcomes of that meeting was to form a task force to look at the possibility of a community center and what projects might be included in that community center, and also what projects might go along with that in a possible voter or sales tax that would be put to the voters for approval. So that task force consisted of 15 community members, different stakeholders from across the community. It also included Councilmember Hagberg and Councilmember Arneson. Councilmember Gustafson attended at least one meeting. Is that correct? Yeah, one meeting. So started in April. That task force met 4 times, and I think really dug into a lot of the questions that the council had asked. Couple takeaways from that, and I'll start the conversation, then any of the 3 of you would just feel free to jump in at any time. But one of the outcomes that I thought was real positive is we had a discussion about partnering with the aquatics task force that's been put together, and the possibilities to look at if there are possibilities for them to partner, looking at indoor, outdoor, different partners within the community. I think everyone agreed that the YMCA would be a likely partner if there was a partner, and so the takeaway from that meeting for me, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the YMCA is in good position. They're in good financial position where they are right now. They're happy with their location. They're in a good place, and I don't believe that there's a project right now that's going to include a partnership with an aquatics in the YMCA. That's one of the takeaways. Second, main takeaway from that was simply the legislative action that took place this year. And the legislature changed its statutes around the sales tax, what cities can and can't do. So just briefly, and Andrew, you can go into more depth if you want, but I think we can take this up when we reconvene a retreat with the council to talk about going forward. But we had talked about combining these different projects under one umbrella to take them to the voters. The state legislature is no longer allowing that. If you have multiple projects that are going to be considered by the voters, they all have to be listed as individual projects. You can no longer say 20% to parks and 30% to streets and communities like St. Cloud currently has that we looked at. So if we had a project that is, whatever project it was, if that was a streets or a pool or a park or whatever it would be, each of them is listed individually, and each of them would be voted on by the voters. So it takes away the ability to kind of put some together to try to gain momentum around a big project. So that's, and the second main piece to take away from the legislature is the fact that they voted to no longer allow, you must gain state legislature approval before you take it to the voters. So you can't take it to the voters and then go to the state legislature. They have to approve your projects ahead of time. So that they're going to be able to really hone in on, is this a project of regional significance, or how do they'll have some ability to change it before you have the opportunity to take it to the voters. And the third thing that I'll mention is that the task force had a list of items that, after discussing, that they believed should go back to the council for the council's consideration of how they would like to go forward. They didn't feel like the task force was, given these new circumstances, their ability to say what projects go forward, but had suggestions back to the council to see if there was interest in, and I don't know if it's going to be in my minutes, but I know that, of course, the aquatics piece has its own project that's already identified. We're going to be discussing that, but also trails were identified as something. The arts were identified, and was there one other thing?
There's no mention of those in the minutes, which probably would be helpful if they were in the minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. Okay, well, those are the two that I know were mentioned. So what we can do is, in my opinion, I think it's the council needs to get back together and retreat, and given this new information, decide how we want to move forward on any potential 2020 ballot measures. So, Krista, did you have
Nope, that pretty much summed it up.
anything? Justin, did you have anything?
No, that was very good. I'm looking for, see it in here.
Caroline?
Good. Childcare, was that the other one?
We'll make sure and go back and look at those and bring back that full list of, there was 3 or 4 that,
I mean,
I think that there is mention of the arts here. I'm not gonna go through these because I don't have my glasses on and I do need glasses these days. But,
Here you go.
I won't take the time, but I know like the second to last, where it's, member Roofer and Michael Burgraff talked about the arts, and so that was some of the discussions. Probably not a specific recommendation in there, but it talked about coming back to just to discuss with the council. So
I mean, I kind of read through the minutes from obviously April 16th through to July, and obviously, as you say, in the opening sort of statement, it mentioned like the downtown riverfront project, street and infrastructure improvements, community center, including components of an aquatic center, teen center, daycare, a comprehensive plan, Lake Alice, housing and trails. And then obviously it made mention that the library bonds retire in 2023. But it kind of also sort of went on to say community members need to be consulted as to what they feel are the greatest needs of the community. Still unsure of the role of the task force. Clarification was made that the city council defined a number of community projects and is asking the task force to help identify projects most likely to be supported by a sales tax question for 2020 or 2022. Then it kind of went on to say about, planning a community conversation to ensure all voices of the public are being heard. And that kind of theme went through. And then another reason for kind of bringing up the aquatic center was that made mention that Detroit Lakes is contributing $185,000 a year to the operations of their kind of community center, which obviously would reflect in a property tax increase for the residents of Fergus Falls. Was also kind of went on about, the task force has a better understanding of their work and can formulate a structure, and it seemed a little bit that they were kind of a little bit lost as to what they were trying to accomplish. And then obviously it seemed like a lot of discussion was held about around the aquatic center as opposed to other projects in the city. So I think even on the last meeting, it was put the aquatics committee was encouraged to explore options for collaboration on their project, and it seems like there doesn't seem like there's a lot of collaboration, to be fair. So I think that if we could readdress like what the list of things was, that would be helpful that came out of it, because the way the minutes read, to my mind, that it wasn't. There wasn't a whole lot of anything else talked about other than kind of the aquatic center. And as you say, the Center of the Arts got brought up that they needed to raise some money, but outside of that, there wasn't really a plan for the Center of the Arts. So I think maybe, as you say, it'll come up in the council retreat review. But it does seem like we didn't accomplish a lot in this task.
Yeah, and I think that the main question coming out of the retreat in February was to see, as these projects move forward, is there an opportunity to collaborate on some of these around community center? The community center was really the impetus for this task force, so that's why we spent 3 meetings to determine whether or not there was whether or not there was a community center out there. I think we went through the work to determine that was going to need a partnership with the Y. The Y, after talking internally, basically at the meeting said, there's probably not a project right there that with the Y, and so that's why the task force, that task force is pretty much done. Coming back to the council and saying, okay, now what do you want us to do? The rules have changed. There is not a community project, so what would you like us to do going forward? So, I think another retreat to say now, given the current situation, the current rules, and the information we know about whether or not there's a community center, what do we want to do? Or do we want to pursue any options for 2020 or not? So that's where I think we're at. I mean, I would say that this committee totally took care of the questions that were out there and came to a conclusion that there's not the project that we were wondering if there was. So I think just council gets back together and determines where we go from here. Any other questions or comments? Anthony?
I think, as you say, if we could update it to have the list of kind of what they see, but also I think it would have been good to have had at least the community voices, because that would have, as you say, helped define what the wish list is. But I kind of think that, the biggest thing that I hear is, before we spend money on anything else, let's fix the roads. So I think if we're going to bond for something or we're going to raise taxes, it should be about infrastructure and roads.
And roads were actually, I should have the list, and I didn't. I
Yep.
didn't. But roads were on there as potentially discussion for what roads do we have that we could justify as a regional benefit? Because you have to justify that to the
Yep.
sales. So that was one of the other. But in light of the LGA situation, I guess the task force thought, if you look at the proportion of local government aid and what we're able to do with that to provide services to the community, that proportion is shrinking. So communities are using sales tax, and the purpose of the sales tax is to generate a region, be a regional center. So if we're going to look at that, I think what are the projects that we could do to actually, bring people in, and that's why I think the committee said streets are very important, but trails and arts are too. So anyway, I think a discussion back to the council under the current rules would be appropriate. Is that fair? And I think we have that meeting
Yeah.
coming up on
21st.
21st?
Yeah.
21st. So I'm looking forward to that discussion, actually. All right, let's move along. Under new business, there will not be a tax levy update, but we have an update on one of our council members has changed wards. This is big news, Justin.
So, in 2019, I got under as a Ward 3 representative for that ward. In light of that, my family and I moved across town. We will be in Ward 2, and so I guess we just have to publicly announce that so people are aware. I will serve out my term in Ward 3 through the end of my term, and then when my term is up, re-election would need to be in Ward 2.
So does that mean to say he gets to shift his seat across the aisle instead of the end next door to Roofer?
Bring it.
Not yet.
And just Rolf's not here, and I don't know if Joe, if you want to comment, but that's the policy that the city's had for decades.
Yeah, Your Honor, members, Joe, if you want me to.
It's correct.
Yeah, this is under our charter. This is the procedure
charter. Yeah, got
for council member moving during their term.
Thanks. All right, so thank you, Justin. With that, a couple of miscellaneous announcements. August 6th is National Night Out. Get out, as we mentioned earlier, I believe there's 29 block parties happening tomorrow night between 5 and 8, so encourage everyone to get out. If I'm going to put you on the spot, Lynn, but if someone calls City Hall, we can get them in touch with someone to find out where their block party is. We'll figure out a way to do that. Sorry, Lynn. And then tomorrow night, Wednesday night, August 7th, is a dairy property public meeting that's required under the regulations of some of the funding that we're receiving. So that will take place right here at City Hall at 6 p.m. And then the next committee of the whole meeting is August 14th, and the city council meeting 2 weeks from tonight, August 19th. Anything, Tom?
Quick circle back to the National Night Out. I think there is a Facebook group out there that might make your job a little bit easier, Lynn. So if folks are looking for that,
Yeah.
there you go. Yeah, but I think there is a Facebook group that is tracking that you can access. So
Sure.
there you go.
Thanks, Tom.
See you
Anything else? Now we're adjourned.